Deep in the desert, the Polaris Institute stood like a fortress of steel against the endless night. Inside, hidden from the world, a chamber of light hummed with dangerous promise. They said it could power cities forever. They also said one wrong move could erase 5 years of knowledge in a single breath. And one night, as the storm gathered, it was not a scientist but the janitor's boy, Henry, who stepped too close to the truth. The wind of the desert howled through the chain-link fences, carrying the dry taste of sand and the sharp sting of ozone. The night was restless. From miles away, before Henry even reached the gates of the Polaris Institute, he could hear the machines inside groaning like beasts in their cages. Something in the rhythm of their breathing was wrong, uneven, as though the entire building was waiting for a storm. Henry clutched his father's hand as they passed through the checkpoint. The guard barely looked up, though his eyes lingered a second longer on Henry, as if sensing that a child had no place inside this fortress of secrets. In the boy's jacket pocket lay his most precious possession, a spiral notebook, dog-eared and stained with ink. On its pages were clumsy sketches of pipes, valves, strange arrows pointing to nowhere, and numbers copied from screens when no one was watching. To the scientists, it would have looked like a child's doodles. To Henry, it was a map, a fragile key to understanding the great machine that hummed behind the locked doors. Polaris by day was a hive of noise. Men and women in white coats hurried through corridors, carrying papers covered in equations, their voices echoing with urgency. But at night the hive grew silent. The endless hallways turned into rivers of shadow, lit only by the pulse of red and green lights on the walls. Henry loved the silence. In it, the machines seemed to breathe. He felt he could almost hear them whisper. That night, his father went about his work with the quiet patience of a man who had spent his life cleaning up after others. The mop swished across the polished floor. The bucket rolled softly behind him. Henry lingered, his eyes drawn to the glow spilling from a door left half open. It was the chamber room, the heart of the institute. He crept closer. Voices leaked into the hallway, low, tense. "Gray protocol. We may have to initiate." "Impossible. If Gray protocol runs, everything is gone. 5 years erased. We have no choice. Orders from above. They fear exposure. They fear what will happen if the public learns the truth." Henry froze, his breath caught in his chest. He did not understand all the words, protocol, data, erased, but he understood enough. Something precious was in danger. Something these powerful people were terrified of losing, or of revealing. Through the crack, Henry could see them. 4 scientists, their faces pale in the light of the monitors. One, younger than the rest, leaned forward, eyes burning with sleepless fire. "Listen to me. The plasma has nearly reached self-sustainment. Do you understand what that means?" "We are closer than anyone ever dreamed." "Which is exactly why they want it buried," another replied. "Too dangerous. Too disruptive. If word gets out, nothing will be the same again." Henry's pulse thundered in his ears. Plasma. Self-sustainment. He had heard scraps of these words before. He remembered one engineer explaining to his father that plasma was like trapping a miniature sun inside a steel chamber. If it could truly sustain itself, it meant energy without end. Cities lit forever. Machines powered without smoke or fuel. A world reborn. And yet here they were, whispering about erasing it. "Henry." His father's voice cut through the silence. The boy jumped, stumbling away from the door. His father's face appeared in the hall, tired eyes narrowing. "Don't linger. Come along." But as Henry followed, his thoughts would not leave that doorway, or the look of fear he had seen in those men's eyes. Later, in the janitor's break room, his father slumped into a chair. His hands, cracked and rough from years of labor, rubbed his forehead. "Tomorrow," he muttered, You stay home. This place isn't for you. It's dangerous. Too dangerous. Henry said nothing. The words gray protocol still rang in his ears. He pulled his spiral notebook from his pocket and, while his father dozed, began to write by the yellow glow of the lamp. Something they want to erase, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too well. His pencil scratched across the page, replaying what he had seen. The glowing pipes, the pressure gauges, the worried faces. His hand trembled, yet he felt an odd calm. He remembered the day 2 years ago when his brother had died in a farm accident. The tractor engine had exploded without warning, leaving Henry staring at a pile of twisted iron and smoke. He had promised himself then that he would one day understand machines. He would not let ignorance kill again. Outside, the desert storm was rising. The wind roared, whipping sand against the walls of the institute. To Henry, it sounded like a warning. The whole building seemed to shiver. He pressed the notebook to his chest, glanced at his father sleeping in the chair, and whispered into the dark, "I'll find out. I won't let them erase everything." He could not know that only hours later lightning would strike, the chamber would fail, and every adult in the building would panic. He could not know that in the silence that followed, it would be his turn to step forward. The janitor's boy, with nothing but a battered notebook and the stubborn light in his eyes. The desert storm arrived with a violence that shook the Polaris Institute to its steel foundations. Lightning split the sky, jagged veins of white fire flashing across the darkness. The walls trembled as thunder rolled, deep and endless, like the growl of something ancient. Henry had fallen asleep on the narrow cot in the janitor's room, his notebook clutched against his chest. It was not the thunder that woke him, but the sudden silence afterward. The hum of the machines, the constant pulse of air through the vents, the faint rhythm of the plasma chamber far away, all of it stopped at once. He sat upright. In that silence, his heart beat louder than anything else. Then the alarms began. A shrill wail tore through the corridors, joined by the flashing of red lights overhead. His father jolted awake, eyes wide with fear. "Stay here," he ordered, already reaching for his keys. But Henry, trembling, was on his feet before the words were finished. They ran into the hallway together. Scientists spilled from their offices, some still in lab coats, others barefoot, all looking toward the plasma chamber. The storm outside raged against the glass windows, but inside the storm was worse. On the far wall, a screen blazed with letters Henry could read even from a distance. Data corruption detected, 27%. The number climbed with every second. Henry felt his throat go dry. "Backup servers," one scientist shouted. "Not responding," another cried. Fingers flew over keyboards, commands flashed across monitors, but the numbers kept climbing. 39%, 42%, 49%. Henry could see the desperation in their movements. For all their brilliance, they looked like cornered animals, trapped by a predator they could not fight. Then, amid the chaos, he noticed one figure move differently. A young man, younger than the others, with dark hair falling into his eyes, slipped to the back of the room. His hands shook, not with panic, but with purpose. He knelt beneath a console, opened a steel panel, and with quick, furtive motions, slid a drive from its socket. He tucked it inside his lab coat. Henry blinked. No one else saw. They were too busy screaming at the numbers climbing higher. 61%, 68%, 72%. The man rose, his face pale, but there was no fear in his eyes. Only secrecy. He looked once toward the door, as though considering escape, then turned back to blend with the crowd. Henry's father gripped his arm. "We should go, now!" But Henry couldn't move. His gaze was locked on the screens. 81%. 87%. The storm outside cracked again, lightning slamming into the desert floor with a sound like the sky breaking in two. For a moment, every light flickered. The plasma chamber groaned, a metallic howl that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth. Then came the smell, sharp, acrid, like burning wires. "Chamber offline," someone shouted. "Pressure collapse in Sector 3. Henry's notebook slipped from his hands, pages fanning open on the floor. The drawings stared back at him. Pipes, gauges, arrows. The same pipes now glowing faintly through the glass wall of the chamber room. He knew their shape. He had memorized them in secret. And now, even in the chaos, he could see something the others had missed. One gauge still twitched above 0. The chamber was not empty. Pressure remained. The data might not be lost. Not yet. He wanted to shout it out, to tell them, but his voice caught in his throat. He was just a boy, the son of the janitor. Who would listen? The scientists argued louder, voices colliding. "Shut it all down before it cascades!" "No, if we shut it down, we lose everything." "You don't understand, the Gray Protocol is already arming. The system will wipe itself if corruption passes 95%. Henry's blood ran cold. Gray Protocol. The words from the night before. The words that had filled him with unease. Now they blared in sirens and red light, no longer whispers but commands written into the heart of the machine. He bent down, picked up his notebook, and hugged it to his chest. His hands shook, but his mind felt sharper than ever. If the gauge was still alive, there had to be a path to recovery. He did not know the codes or the protocols, but he could see the lines in his head. Valves, pressure, release. A puzzle, and puzzles always had answers. But to act on that answer meant stepping into the chamber itself. Henry swallowed hard. His father's hand gripped his shoulder. "Henry, we're leaving." He looked up at the man who had carried buckets his whole life, who had broken his back so his son could sit in classrooms he never dreamed of. He saw fear in his father's eyes. Fear not for himself, but for losing his only son, just as he had lost another boy years ago. "I can't," Henry whispered. The alarms screamed louder. The numbers raced higher. 92%, 93%. His father shook him hard. "Listen to me, Henry. This is not your fight." But Henry thought of his brother, of the silence after the tractor exploded, of the way no one could explain why the machine had failed. He thought of the scientists whispering about secrets too dangerous for the world to know, and he thought of the little gauge, still twitching, like a heartbeat refusing to die. "This is my fight," he said, though his voice was no more than a breath. The young scientist with the hidden drive glanced across the room. For an instant his eyes met Henry's. Did he know the boy had seen? Did he realize the janitor's son was watching? The building shuddered with another strike of lightning. The red lights flickered, then steadied. The monitors screamed. 94%. 95%. And Henry, clutching his notebook like a shield, took his first step toward the chamber doors. The sirens did not stop. They screamed through every hallway of the Polaris Institute, drowning out human voices, drowning out thought itself. Red lights pulsed against steel walls like the heartbeat of a wounded giant. Henry moved toward the chamber doors, step by step, though his legs felt made of sand. His father grabbed him, pulling him back. "Enough," his father hissed. "We are leaving, now!" But the boy's eyes stayed locked on the massive glass wall beyond which the plasma chamber lay. The glow inside had dimmed to a sickly flicker. On the monitors above, the numbers climbed like the hands of a clock rushing toward midnight. 96% corruption. "Shut it down!" roared Dr. Kellen, the Institute's director. his voice booming across the control room. He was a tall man with silver hair and a jaw clenched so tightly it seemed carved from stone. "Shut everything down and prepare to initiate Gray Protocol." "No!" Another voice broke through. A woman, younger, her lab coat stained with ink and coffee. Her name, Henry would learn later, was Dr. Elara. She slammed her fist against the console. "If we shut it all down now, the chamber collapses permanently. We lose everything." Dr. Kellen's eyes narrowed. "Better lost than leaked." The room erupted. Scientists shouted over one another, some siding with the director, others with Elara. Fingers jabbed at screens, papers scattered, chairs toppled. Henry had never seen adults fight like this. These were the people who were supposed to know everything, the ones who spoke in numbers and formulas. And now they looked like frightened children quarreling in the dark. The number on the main screen leapt again. 97% corruption. Henry's father pulled him close, his voice breaking with fear. "Do you want to die like your brother? Is that what you want?" The words cut deep, sharper than any siren. Henry remembered the explosion on the farm, the fire, the smoke. His brother's face that day, gone in an instant. His father's grief had never healed. He was terrified of losing again. But Henry also remembered the gauge, that stubborn needle twitching above zero, the hidden sign that not all was lost. "No," Henry whispered. "I don't want to die, but I don't want this to die either." Dr. Kellen turned toward the crowd, raising his voice above the chaos. "Gray Protocol activates automatically at 99% corruption. That gives us 2 minutes. Everyone stand down." "Stand down?" Elara spat. "You want us to hand over 5 years of work because someone higher up is afraid of the truth?" A hush fell over the room. The words hung in the air like sparks. Afraid of the truth. Kellen's face darkened. "You don't understand the stakes. We are not free agents here. Orders come from above. We obey." "And what about the science?" Elara's voice trembled, but not with fear, with fury. "What about the world that could have clean power? Children who would never know darkness again? You would erase that because someone told you to?" The silence cracked like glass. Scientists looked at one another, unsure, ashamed. Some shifted uneasily. Others avoided her gaze. Henry watched it all, clutching his notebook so tightly the wire spiral cut into his palm. He wanted to shout that the chamber could still be saved, that the pressure gauge meant there was still a chance, but his voice felt trapped in his throat. He was just a boy. What could he say that these brilliant minds would hear? Then his eyes fell on the young man who had hidden the drive earlier. The man stood quietly at the edge of the room, his hands folded behind his back, his expression carefully blank. But Henry had seen. Henry knew. That man had saved something, hidden something. And suddenly Henry understood. Not everyone in this room wanted the chamber to survive. The monitors blared again. 98% corruption. Kellen raised his hand. "Prepare for full shutdown. Gray Protocol in 30 seconds. Elara turned away, her face pale with despair. Around her, the others began moving like sleepwalkers, following orders they did not believe in. Henry's chest burned. He could no longer stay silent. His voice broke through the wail of the alarms, high and trembling, but louder than he knew he could speak. "Wait! The chamber isn't empty!" Every head turned. Dozens of eyes fell on him, the janitor's boy, standing small and defiant in the red glow. His father's grip tightened painfully on his shoulder, trying to drag him back. Henry tore free. He held up his notebook, pages fluttering like wings. "The pressure gauge. It's not zero. There's still energy inside. If you release it the right way, you can stabilize it. You don't have to erase everything. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then Kellen's laugh cut through the silence. Harsh, bitter. "A child! The son of a janitor! Do you hear this?" He spread his arms toward the crowd. "While we stand at the edge of catastrophe, this boy thinks he has the answer. This is madness." Henry's cheeks burned, but he did not lower his notebook. Dr. Alara's eyes flicked toward the boy, sharp and searching. She stepped forward. "What did you see?" "The gauge," Henry said, forcing the words out. "It's still alive. You can use it. You don't have to lose the data." Alara turned to the others. "He's right. If the chamber still holds pressure, we might—" "Enough!" Kellen roared. He slammed his fist on the console, and the lights above flickered. "Gray Protocol is not optional. It is law. If you defy it, you risk more than your careers. You risk everything." But Henry saw doubt ripple through the room. Scientists looked from him to Alara, to Kellen, torn between fear and hope. The alarms screamed louder. 99% corruption. "Protocol arming," the machine's voice intoned, cold and merciless. Henry knew then that the choice would be made in seconds. The adults around him were paralyzed, bound by orders and fear. If anything was to be done, it would not be them. It would be him. He closed his notebook, tucked it under his arm, and took a step toward the chamber doors. His father shouted, his voice breaking. "Henry, don't you dare!" But Henry's feet carried him forward, trembling but unstoppable. In his heart, he felt the weight of everything. His brother's death, his father's fear, the scientist's silence. The world might not believe in him, but he believed in the trembling needle on that gauge. The steel doors loomed before him, glowing red under the alarm lights. Behind them lay danger, fire, and perhaps death, but also truth. Henry placed his hand on the cold metal handle and pushed. The steel doors groaned as Henry pushed them open. A wave of heat struck his face, dry and metallic, like breathing in from a furnace. The alarms out in the control room muffled as the heavy doors closed behind him, sealing him into a space that felt less like a room and more like the belly of some enormous machine. The plasma chamber loomed at the center, a sphere of reinforced glass and steel bands thicker than tree trunks. Its glow had faded, no longer the brilliant sun-like fire it was built to contain, but an ember still pulsed inside, a trembling knot of light. It flickered faintly blue, like the ghost of a star refusing to die. Above him, catwalks and pipes crisscrossed like the skeleton of a cathedral. Valves hissed weakly, leaking small clouds of argon gas that shimmered in the red warning lights. Henry's shoes clanged softly against the grated floor as he moved forward, his breath fogging in the heavy air. He clutched his notebook in one hand. The first thing his eyes found was the gauge. It was smaller than he remembered, tucked among a cluster of dials, but there it was, the needle trembling above zero. Not much, but enough. Enough to tell him what the others could not see from behind their screens. The chamber was not dead. Henry's chest tightened. He felt the way he had when he first learned to ride his brother's old bicycle, fear and exhilaration wrapped into one. One wrong move and he would fall. But the possibility of balance kept him moving forward. He opened his notebook, flipping to a page he had filled weeks ago, long before the storm. A rough sketch of the chamber's pressure system. The lines were crooked, the arrows uneven, but the pattern was there. Intake on one side, release on the other, and always at the heart, the balance between them. Henry remembered words he had overheard from a tired engineer one night while mopping floors. Too much pressure and the plasma destabilizes. Too little and it dies. You have to breathe with it, like tending a fire. A fire. That was what he saw now, a fire gasping for air. If he could release the trapped argon at the right moment, the pressure might equalize. The plasma could steady itself long enough for the system to recover. But there was no console here, no glowing keyboard to type into. Only valves, heavy, rusting wheels that had to be turned by hand. Henry's palms were slick with sweat. He was 12 years old. His arms were thin, his muscles slight. Could he even move them? From beyond the doors, faint voices shouted his name. His father's cry carried above the others, breaking with fear. Henry shut his eyes for a moment. He pictured his brother's face, laughing in the sun before the accident. He pictured his father's shoulders, bent from years of labor, holding up a family with nothing but will. And he pictured the ember of plasma before him, a light that could outlast storms and hunger and darkness, if someone gave it the chance. He gripped the first valve wheel with both hands. Metal bit into his fingers. He strained, the wheel refusing to budge. His lungs burned. The alarms screamed louder. For a moment, despair welled up in his chest. Then the wheel groaned. Slowly, stubbornly, it turned. A hiss of argon escaped, swirling silver in the red light. The gauge needle twitched. Henry staggered back, heart racing. He scribbled in his notebook with frantic strokes. Release valve 1, partial, gauge responding. He ran to the second valve. This one was higher, forcing him to climb the metal rungs bolted into the wall. His arms shook with the effort, but he reached it, hooked his foot for balance, and pulled. The wheel screamed, rust grinding against rust before giving way. Another hiss. Another breath for the plasma. The ember inside the chamber flared brighter. Not steady, not safe, but alive. Behind him, the intercom crackled. Dr. Kellen's voice boomed, distorted and furious. "Get that boy out of there, now!" Another voice followed. Ilara's, softer, urgent. "Henry, listen to me. If you open too many valves at once, the chamber could rupture. You must balance intake and release. Do you understand?" Henry pressed his pencil to paper, drawing a crude seesaw. Balance, intake, release. The words made sense. He nodded, though they could not see. The third valve stood across a catwalk that shook under his feet. He moved quickly, each clang of his shoes echoing in the cavernous space. His notebook slapped against his side, pages flapping. He reached the valve, steadied his breath, and turned. The hiss that followed was sharper, stronger. The plasma pulsed. The gauge needle rose. From the control room, cheers erupted, quickly smothered by Kellen's barked command. "Shut the chamber. Gray protocol is final." But Henry knew what he felt in his chest. The chamber was breathing again. Weak, but real. He scribbled again in his notebook. 3 valves. Plasma flaring. Need final balance. His eyes scanned the web of pipes above him. 1 valve remained. The largest. It sat directly over the chamber sphere, a wheel as tall as his chest. It gleamed faintly, untouched for months. Henry climbed the ladder, his arms trembling, every step rattling beneath his weight. He reached the platform, wrapped his hands around the wheel, and pulled with everything in him. Nothing. His muscles screamed, the alarms deafened. The glow below flickered on the edge of collapse. Henry thought of his father's voice outside. "Do you want to die like your brother?" He thought of the scientists who had whispered, ashamed, of orders they were too afraid to resist. He thought of the ember inside that chamber, the one thing in the world still fighting to survive. He planted his feet, bit down hard, and pulled again. The wheel turned. The chamber exhaled. A rush of argon thundered through the pipes, filling the room with a hiss like 1,000 snakes. The ember flared bright, swelling into a sphere of living blue light. The catwalk shook beneath Henry's feet. He staggered back, shielding his eyes. And then, for the first time that night, the plasma steadied. The gauge needle froze, balanced. Silence fell. The alarms cut off one by one, leaving only the hum of a living star in its cage. Henry dropped to his knees, notebook clutched to his chest. His breath came ragged, but his eyes shone with something fierce and unbroken. He had found the clue, and in finding it, he had kept the world's secret alive. The silence inside the plasma chamber was almost holy. The alarms had ceased, leaving only the low, steady hum of the reactor as the blue light held steady in its sphere. Henry knelt on the catwalk, his notebook pressed against his chest, his arms trembling from effort. He had done it. He had breathed life back into the ember. But the silence did not last. The chamber doors banged open behind him. Boots clattered against the metal floor, voices burst in, angry, disbelieving, afraid. "There he is! Get that boy out of here!" His father reached him first. The man's face was pale with terror, sweat shining on his brow. He grabbed Henry by the shoulders, shaking him so hard the notebook slipped from the boy's hands and clattered across the floor. "Henry, what were you thinking?" His father's voice cracked. "Do you want to leave me alone? Do you want to die like your brother?" Henry's mouth opened, but no words came. He could not explain the pulse of the gauge, the balance of valves, the way the plasma had steadied like a flame tended by careful breath. He could only whisper, "I had to." Before his father could answer, Dr. Kellen stormed in, his silver hair damp with sweat, his face thunderous. His voice filled the chamber. "This is an outrage," he roared. "A child endangers classified equipment, violates every protocol we live by. And you cheer?" Because behind him, in the doorway, stood Dr. Ilara. Her eyes were fixed on the sphere of light, steady and alive, and in them burned something Henry had not seen in the others. Hope. "Kellen," she said softly. "Look, the chamber's alive." The boy was right. Her words lit sparks through the crowd of scientists who had followed. They stared at the plasma, then at Henry, then at one another, their fear slowly giving way to astonishment. Kellen spun on them, fury in every line of his body. "Do not be deceived. This was recklessness, nothing more. The chamber stabilized by chance, not because of him." He jabbed a finger toward Henry, his voice like a whip. "This boy is no scientist. He is a janitor's son. He knows nothing of fusion, of plasma confinement, of magnetic equilibrium. Nothing." Henry's cheeks burned, but he stood his ground. "I know what I saw," he said, his voice small but steady. "The gauge was still alive. I just listened to it." A murmur rippled through the scientists. Some frowned. Others lowered their eyes. But Ilara stepped forward, defiance in her voice. "He's not wrong. Plasma is not numbers on a screen. It's pressure, balance, breath. If he read the gauge, if he felt the chamber, maybe that's what we missed." She looked at Henry then, and for the first time someone looked at him not as the janitor's son, but as if he truly belonged in the room. Kellen slammed his hand against the railing. "Enough! Gray Protocol is still law. The order was clear. Erase everything. Stabilized or not, the project ends tonight." The words hit Henry like a stone. After everything, after the fear, the climb, the valves, the risk, they still wanted to erase it? He glanced at Ilara. She bit her lip, her fists clenched at her sides. "Why?" Henry asked, his voice trembling. He looked at Kellen, at the crowd, at the sphere of living light. "Why would you destroy something that could save the world?" The room stilled. His words hung in the heavy air. It was Ilara who finally answered, though her voice was quiet. "Because they're afraid, Henry. Afraid of power that cannot be controlled. Afraid of what happens if the world learns it doesn't need oil or coal or war for energy. Afraid of losing everything they built." Henry's father pulled him close, whispering in his ear, "Do you see? This isn't our fight. We don't belong in their battles." But Henry could not look away from the plasma. It pulsed gently, like a star in chains, alive because he had dared to believe it could be. And then, across the crowd, Henry's eyes met those of the young scientist he had seen earlier, the one who had slipped the drive into his coat. The man stood still, silent, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Henry's stomach turned. Someone in this room wanted the project destroyed, not just hidden. Kellen drew himself up, his voice final. "Shut it down. Gray protocol now." But Alara stepped forward, blocking the console. "Not while I'm here." Gasps rippled through the scientists. For a moment, no one moved. Henry's father tightened his grip, whispering urgently, "We have to leave. Now." But Henry shook his head. His eyes stayed on the blue light, steady and alive, and the notebook at his feet. It was not just a child's scribbles anymore. It was proof. Proof that he could see what others could not. Proof that sometimes truth comes from where no one expects it. Dr. Alara turned her head slightly toward him. Her voice was barely audible, meant only for Henry. "If you're right, if you truly saw the balance, then you may have saved us all. But they won't forgive you for breaking the rules." Henry bent, picked up his notebook, and held it tight against his chest. He was shaking, his knees weak, but his eyes did not leave the plasma. For the first time in his life, he knew with certainty he was not invisible. He was part of this story now. And though the night outside raged with lightning and storm, the real storm had already begun inside Polaris. A storm of truth against power, of fear against hope. And Henry, the janitor's boy, had just broken the first rule. The chamber had steadied, but the air in Polaris Institute had not. Arguments still rang against the steel walls. Dr. Kellen demanded shutdown. Dr. Alara stood in defiance, and the crowd of scientists hovered in between, shifting like reeds in a storm. The blue plasma pulsed in its sphere, a star caged behind glass, alive but fragile. Henry stood with his father's arm locked around his shoulders. The man's grip was iron, as though holding Henry against the pull of the glowing machine. "Enough of this," Kellen barked. "The boy leaves. He has no place here. One mistake, one slip of a valve, and the chamber takes us all with it." His father nodded fiercely, pulling Henry back toward the doors. "You heard him. We're going." But Alara's voice rose. "Wait!" The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to her. She pointed at the sphere, at the steady light. "He saw what we could not. He acted when we froze. You may not want to admit it, but that boy saved 5 years of work tonight." Kellen's face hardened, but before he could respond, the lights above flickered. The hum of the plasma dipped, then rose again with a sharp crackle. Sparks leapt across one of the outer coils. A monitor shrieked with warning text, "Magnetic containment, unstable." Gasps swept the room. Henry's eyes flew to the gauge. The needle trembled again, not falling, not rising, but quivering as if caught between two breaths. Alara's hands flew across the console. "The balance isn't complete. One of the feeds is blocked. If it holds too long, the plasma could rupture." Kellen snapped, "Then shut it down." But Alara shook her head. "If we kill it now, the data collapses anyway. We need to flush the blockage manually." Her eyes found Henry's. For an instant, in the flashing red light, she looked almost afraid to speak. Then she said it anyway. "Someone has to go back in." The chamber fell silent again, but this silence was heavier. Henry's father stepped in front of him, voice breaking. "No, not my boy. Not after what he's already done." You want to risk lives. Risk your own, not his. But Ilara's gaze did not leave Henry. She wasn't commanding him. She was asking, and Henry felt it deep in his chest. She believed he had seen something no one else could. The floor shook beneath their feet. The plasma flared bright, then dimmed, unstable. Warning sirens screamed once more. Henry's father clutched him close, whispering fiercely. I lost one son to a machine. I won't lose another. Henry's voice came small but steady. Dad, if I don't go, we lose everything. His father's grip faltered. For a moment his eyes betrayed all the years of grief he had carried alone. The image of one son gone, the terror of losing the last. Then he shook his head as if to ward off the thought. No, he said. I can't. Henry bent down, picked up his notebook from where it lay open on the floor. He pressed the battered pages to his chest, feeling their weight like armor. I can, he whispered. And before his father could stop him, Henry slipped free, running toward the inner ladder that climbed into the machine's skeleton. The shouts of men and women echoed behind him, some calling his name in warning, others simply watching in awe. His father's cry cut deepest of all, ragged with despair. But Henry's feet did not stop. He climbed. The chamber air was hotter now, each step up the ladder pulling sweat from his skin. Sparks spat from cables overhead. The smell of burning metal stung his nose. The blockage had to be near the intake line. That was what the gauges had shown him. One valve wheel stuck. If he could release it, the plasma could breathe again. He reached the catwalk and ran, notebook bouncing at his side. The chamber groaned around him, a living thing in pain. He looked down once. The blue sphere writhed inside its cage, swirling, unstable, as if it might burst. Halfway across the catwalk, a sound froze him. A clang. Someone else was here. From the shadows, a figure stepped out. The young scientist, the one who had hidden the drive earlier. His face was calm, too calm. His eyes cold. You shouldn't be here, boy, he said. His voice was quiet, but the words cut through the machine's roar. You weren't meant to see this. Henry's heart hammered. You did this. The man smiled faintly but did not deny it. Gray Protocol was always going to run. The sponsors wanted it gone, cleaner to let the storm finish the job. But you interfered. He took a step closer, his hand brushing against the valve wheel Henry had come to reach. This isn't your world, boy. Go back to your father. Forget what you saw. Henry shook his head, clutching his notebook. I can't. The man's smile vanished. His voice hardened. Then you won't leave this chamber. The plasma roared, a crack of light splitting across its surface like lightning inside glass. The catwalk trembled. Sparks showered down. Henry's grip tightened on his notebook. His mind raced. He was small, weak. He couldn't fight this man. But he could think. And somewhere in this cathedral of steel, a single valve still waited to be turned. The catwalk shook beneath Henry's feet, rattling like a bridge in the wind. Below him, the plasma sphere writhed. The blue light was no longer steady. It pulsed in jagged bursts, swelling and shrinking like a heart in distress. Each flare struck the steel bands around it, making them groan as if they might snap. Henry clutched his notebook against his chest. His other hand gripped the rail, knuckles white. The saboteur, the young scientist with the dark hair and calm eyes, stood only a few steps away, one hand resting on the valve Henry had come for. His face was illuminated in flashes of blue light, sharp and cold. You don't understand, the man said, his voice low, steady. This project was never meant to live. The sponsors cannot allow it. Too much power, too much disruption. Energy that never runs out. It would tear the world apart. Henry's throat tightened. It would save it. The man's eyes narrowed. You think like a child. Endless fire is not salvation. It is chaos. The chamber groaned. Sparks rained from the cables above. The monitors outside screamed warnings Henry could not hear clearly through the thick doors, but he knew what they meant. Containment failing. Pressure unstable. He glanced at the gauge. The needle trembled on the edge of collapse. If it fell, the plasma would unravel, a miniature sun exploding inside steel walls. Henry's heart pounded. He thought of his father's voice outside, shouting his name, begging him to stop. He thought of his brother, lost to a machine he could not control. And he thought of the world beyond the desert, the darkened towns, the farms like his own, where children studied by lamplight because electricity was too costly. The saboteur stepped closer. Leave the valve. Walk away. If the chamber fails, no one will blame you. They will blame the storm. You will be safe. Henry tightened his grip on his notebook. The edges dug into his palm, grounding him. Safe isn't the same as right. The man's lips curved, not in kindness, but in pity. Then you will learn what it means to burn. Another shudder ran through the catwalk. The plasma flared bright, so bright it seared Henry's eyes. For an instant, he could see nothing but light. Then, silence. The alarms cut out. The roaring hum died. Even the hiss of escaping gas vanished. The world held its breath. Henry realized he could hear his own heartbeat, slow and thunderous. The plasma sphere stilled. No flicker, no crackle. Just a terrifying calm, as if the miniature sun had frozen in place. The gauge needle stopped shaking. It hovered in the air, motionless. Time stretched. Every second felt like a minute, every breath a decision. Henry looked at the valve wheel only steps away. If he reached it, if he turned it just enough, the chamber might breathe again. But the saboteur stood in his path, blocking the way. "Don't," the man whispered. The silence made his voice sharper, crueler. "One touch, and you bring the whole thing down. You're not saving it, boy. You're gambling with lives you don't even understand." Henry's fingers brushed across the notebook. The page open was one he had scribbled long ago. Crooked arrows, uneven lines, a seesaw with the word balance. He thought of the engineer's words. You have to breathe with it, like tending a fire. The plasma wasn't dead. It was holding its breath, waiting. Henry looked back at the saboteur. You're wrong. It isn't chaos. It's a fire. And fire doesn't destroy if you tend it. It gives life. The man's face hardened. He moved his hand over the valve as though daring Henry to try. From outside the chamber, Henry's father's voice broke through, muffled but desperate. "Henry, please, don't do this! Come back!" Tears stung Henry's eyes. For a moment he almost gave in, almost turned away, back to the door, back to safety. But then he remembered his brother's laughter, cut short in an explosion. He remembered his father's bent shoulders, carrying weight no man should carry alone. He remembered the dark farmhouses and the children studying in dim candlelight. And he remembered the ember. Henry straightened. His voice was barely more than a breath. Whoa. But it filled the silence. I have to. He stepped forward. The saboteur lunged to block him, but Henry ducked under the man's arm, clutching the rail with all his strength. His small body slipped through the space between man and steel, and his hands slammed against the valve wheel. It was cold and unyielding. His muscles screamed as he twisted with all the strength in his thin arms. The saboteur shouted, grabbing for him, but Henry pressed his weight into the wheel, his heart pounding in his ears. For an endless moment, nothing happened. Then, the wheel moved. The silence shattered. The chamber exhaled. Argon gas hissed in a torrent, and the plasma flared to life once more. Blue light filled the room, brighter than before, steady and fierce. The catwalk shook, but the gauge needle rose and steadied. The saboteur stumbled back, shielding his face from the blaze. Henry collapsed against the wheel, chest heaving, notebook pressed against his heart. He had chosen. And for one perfect second, the star in the chamber breathed with him. The valve groaned as Henry forced it open. His arms ached, his palms burned, but the wheel finally gave way. With a sound like the rush of 1,000 winds, the chamber exhaled. Argon gas hissed through pipes that rattled like bones, and then the plasma roared back to life. Light exploded inside the sphere. Blue fire filled the room, not flickering but blazing, a miniature star reborn. It bathed the steel catwalks in brilliance, casting shadows like the ribs of some colossal beast. For an instant, Henry felt as though he were standing not inside a machine, but inside the dawn of a new world. The gauge needle leapt, then steadied, pointing to balance. The hum returned, not frantic, not faltering, but strong, deep, and steady. The plasma had caught its breath. Outside the glass, the control room erupted. Some scientists gasped in awe, others clapped hands to their mouths. A few even cheered, though quickly silenced under Kellen's glare. Henry staggered back from the valve, clutching his notebook. His chest heaved, his arms trembled, but his eyes were fixed on the living sphere below. For the first time all night, he felt not fear, but wonder. The saboteur, forced back by the burst of light, shielded his face. His expression was not awe, but fury. He had wanted collapse, not rebirth. He slipped away into the shadows of the catwalk, unnoticed by all but Henry. The boy's eyes followed him for a moment, then returned to the light. And then something unexpected happened. The monitors in the control room flickered. Warnings disappeared. In their place, lines of text scrolled across the screens, not the cold commands of a machine, but something hidden, something buried deep. Accessing file, erase log. The scientists froze. Words appeared, one after another, glowing white against black. Scheduled failure. Plasma containment. Initiated remotely. Trigger. External power surge. Storm interference exploited. Objective. Complete data erasure. Unrecoverable. Gasps rippled through the room. Some shook their heads, refusing to believe. Others read on, eyes wide with horror. Protocol overseen by sponsors. Directive. Terminate project, prevent dissemination. Henry did not understand every word, but he understood enough. The storm had not been an accident. The failure had been designed. Someone, perhaps many someones, had wanted the chamber to die. The data erased, the truth buried. Dr. Elara's face went pale. She looked at Kellen, her voice shaking. "You knew." Kellen's jaw tightened. He said nothing. "You knew," she repeated, louder now, fury in her eyes. "This wasn't just about fear of danger. You were ordered to kill it." The room erupted again, this time not in panic but in outrage. Voices shouted. Questions flew. Some turned on Kellen, others turned on each other. But Henry heard only the steady hum of the plasma, alive because he had refused to let it die. He pressed his notebook tighter against his chest. The words on the screens burned into his mind. Not an accident, not a storm, sabotage. The saboteur's eyes flicked to the monitors, then to Henry. For an instant their gazes locked. The man's expression was cold, as if promising, "This isn't over." Then he slipped through a side door, vanishing into the maze of pipes and ladders. Henry wanted to cry out, to warn them, but the chaos in the control room drowned his voice. Instead, he looked at the plasma. The light inside the sphere pulsed gently now, like a heart beating in calm rhythm. It was fragile, yes, but alive. And in that light, Henry saw more than science. He saw his brother's face, his father's tired hands, the farms struggling in the desert. He saw a future where children could study without fear of lamps going out, where machines worked without choking the sky with smoke. He saw hope. Alara pressed against the glass, her voice rising above the others. "We have proof now. Proof they tried to bury us. Proof of what we've built. If we can protect this data, if we can send it out..." Kellen's roar cut her off. "Enough! Do you think they will let you? Do you think you can defy the hands that feed this institute? You will be crushed, all of you." But no one moved to obey him. The spell of fear had been broken by the light, by the boy, by the truth scrolling across the screens. Henry bent over his notebook, his pencil scratching furiously. He drew the gauge, the valves, the flare of light. Beside it, he wrote a single word, one he had barely dared to think before. Alive. The doors behind him banged open, and his father rushed in, climbing the ladder with wild eyes. He pulled Henry into his arms, holding him so tightly the boy could scarcely breathe. "Never again," his father whispered hoarsely. "Never again will I lose you." Henry buried his face against the man's chest, but his eyes stayed open, fixed on the sphere below. His father could protect him from many things, but not from truth, not from the call of that living light. Outside, the storm still raged over the desert, lightning splitting the sky. But inside, another storm had begun, one of secrets, lies, and the courage of those willing to break them open. And in the center of it all, a janitor's boy had lit a star. The chamber still glowed, a star caged in glass, its steady hum pulsing through the steel like a heartbeat. Yet the control room was louder than the machine itself. Chaos, shouts, anger, fear. On the monitors, the words from the hidden file still glared in stark white. Scheduled failure, sabotage. Directive, terminate project. There was no denying it. Someone, perhaps everyone at the top, had conspired to kill the work. Dr. Alara stood at the console, her hands gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles were white. Her voice rose above the storm of arguments. "You've seen it with your own eyes. This was never about safety. They tried to bury us. They wanted the data gone." Some of the scientists nodded, shame flickering in their eyes. Others looked down at their shoes, unwilling to meet her gaze. A few glanced nervously at Dr. Kellen. The director stood tall, his silver hair glowing red in the alarm light, his jaw set like iron. His voice carried the weight of authority, cutting through the noise. "Yes, they ordered it. Yes, I followed." His words fell like stones. "And do you know why? Because if this knowledge escapes, it will not save the world. It will shatter it. Nations will fight to control it. Blood will run. You think you have built salvation. You have built war." His words stunned the room into silence. Then Henry spoke. His voice was soft, high, the voice of a boy, but in the hush it carried. "If you're so afraid of war, why did you make it in the first place?" All eyes turned to him, the janitor's boy, standing small, clutching a battered notebook to his chest, his father's hand hovering at his shoulder. Henry swallowed hard, but the words kept coming. "Why start something only to destroy it? Why build a fire and then snuff it out? If it can light the world, why do you choose to leave it in darkness?" His father whispered fiercely, "Henry, please! Enough!" But it was too late. The silence was broken. The question hung in the air, heavier than all the alarms. Elara turned, her eyes shining. He's right. What's the point of knowledge if we bury it? What's the point of progress if we chain it to fear? Kellen's face twisted. Do you think the world is kind? Do you think people will share this gift? No. They will weaponize it. They will hoard it. They will burn each other with it. That is why the sponsors ordered termination. That is why I obeyed. Elara's voice grew fierce. And what about hope, Kellen? What about the children in the dark? The farms dying in the desert? The families breaking under the weight of oil and coal? Will you take hope from them too? Out of fear! Kellen's fist slammed against the console, the crack echoing. I will not gamble with lives for the fantasies of a child! Henry flinched, but his gaze did not drop. He thought of his brother, of the explosion, of the silence that had followed. He thought of the gauge, trembling but alive, waiting for someone to act. Quietly he said, Maybe it's not a gamble. Maybe it's a promise. For a moment no one spoke. Then Elara moved. She pulled a small, portable drive from her pocket, not the one stolen by the saboteur, but another, blank and waiting. Her hands flew over the console. If we can copy the data now before Gray Protocol wipes the system, we can save it. Send it out. Hide it somewhere they can't erase it. Gasps filled the room. A scientist cried out, That's treason! It's truth, Elara shot back. She turned to the others. Who here will help me? Who here will choose hope over fear? Some shifted uneasily. Others remained frozen. But a few, trembling, hesitant, stepped forward. Kellen's voice thundered. You will not! I forbid it! But his command no longer carried the weight it once had. The sight of the living plasma, the proof of sabotage, the boy's words, they had cracked the wall of obedience. Henry watched as Elara slid the drive into the console. Numbers filled the screen. Copying, 1%, 2%. His father gripped his arm hard. Henry, we can't be part of this. This isn't our fight. We're just cleaners. This is their war. Henry looked up at him, tears in his eyes. Dad, maybe it's everyone's fight. The copy climbed. 7%, 14%, 22%. Kellen's voice grew cold. You don't know what you're doing. They will find you. They will silence you. And when they do, your families will suffer. Elara's jaw set. Maybe. But maybe the truth will already be free. Henry clutched his notebook. In it was the sketch of the valves, the crooked lines of a boy's hand, and proof that sometimes courage begins with seeing what no one else dares to see. The plasma pulsed steady behind the glass, a star burning in defiance. The copy climbed higher. 41%. 58%. Henry's father bowed his head, torn between fear and pride. For the first time since his elder son's death, he realized he could not protect Henry from the world. But maybe, just maybe, Henry was meant to protect something larger than them both. And in the storm-lit night above the desert, the battle lines were drawn, fear and obedience on one side, truth and hope on the other. And at the center of it all, holding his battered notebook, stood the janitor's boy. The desert storm had passed. The institute, once filled with alarms and shouts, was quiet again. Too quiet, like a battlefield after the smoke has cleared. In the control room, the copy bar had reached 100% before the final shutdown command arrived. Dr. Elara slipped the drive into her pocket, her hands trembling, her eyes wet. A handful of scientists had chosen to stand with her, others had looked away, trapped between fear and conscience. Dr. Kellen had not spoken again. His face was gray with exhaustion, his authority cracked beyond repair. He stood alone, staring at the pulsing plasma as though it mocked him. The saboteur had vanished into the maze of corridors. Perhaps he was gone for good, perhaps waiting in shadows. No one knew. But Henry knew one thing. The chamber still breathed, and the truth had escaped with it. His father's arm was around his shoulders as they left the institute. The man did not speak, but his grip told the story. Relief tangled with grief, pride tangled with fear. They stepped out into the desert air just as the first hint of dawn broke across the horizon. For the first time all night, Henry breathed deeply. The storm had washed the air clean. The sky blushed faintly with light, the kind of light that promises a new day even when the night has left scars. Days later, they returned to the farm. The small house sat in silence at the edge of dry fields. The tractor, rusting since the accident, leaned against the barn like a broken soldier. The land was still poor, the soil still hard, but something in the air felt changed. Henry stood by the well with his father. The new pump, powered by a small solar unit, sputtered to life. Water arced into the trough, catching the morning sun. His father watched, then placed a rough, weathered hand on Henry's shoulder. "You scared me," he said softly. "I know." Henry's voice was quiet. "I was scared too." His father's eyes lingered on him. "You went where grown men feared to go. You did what I begged you not to, and yet—" He shook his head, his voice catching. "And yet I've never been prouder." Henry swallowed hard. I didn't want it to die. Not like my brother. Not like the machines at home that break and no one fixes. I thought, if I could keep it alive, maybe the world could breathe again." His father's arms drew him close, holding him tight. "I lost one son to fire. I almost lost another. But maybe this is who you are, Henry. Maybe you were meant to see what others can't." Henry buried his face in the man's chest. For the first time since his brother's death, he felt the warmth of forgiveness, not only for his father, but for himself. In the weeks that followed, whispers spread beyond the desert, about a project that should have failed, but didn't, about data that should have been erased, but survived, about a boy, no one knew his name, who had seen balance where others saw only collapse. Henry didn't care about the whispers. He had his notebook. On its pages were crooked sketches of valves, gauges, and a glowing sphere. But more than that, between the lines, he had written the word he had chosen that night: alive. Every time he opened it, he remembered the hum of the plasma, the light that pulsed like a heart, and the choice he had made in silence. Elara wrote once. Weeks later, in a letter Henry's father barely understood, but Henry read again and again. "The sponsors will hunt us. But the truth has already begun to move. Somewhere, someday, the world will see the light." Thank you, Henry, for reminding us that fear is not the same as wisdom. Henry tucked the letter into his notebook. One morning, as the sun rose over the dry fields, Henry stood by the pump, water spilling clear and cold. He lifted his face to the light. For a moment, he imagined the blue fire of the plasma sphere, alive and waiting, not buried but growing in secret places. His father came to stand beside him. The man's shadow stretched long over the ground. "What will you do now?" he asked. Henry smiled faintly, holding up the notebook. Its cover was worn, its pages dog-eared, but inside it held both mistakes and miracles. "I'll keep learning," Henry said. "I'll listen, to machines, to people, to the world." His father nodded slowly, his eyes shining in the morning sun. And as the desert woke to another day, Henry felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. He had not only saved Data, or a chamber, or a star in steel. He had saved the belief that even the smallest hands could hold something vast. And though he was only the janitor's boy, on that dawn he carried the weight of a brighter future, one page at a time, in a battered notebook that had learned how to keep the fire alive. This story is dedicated to all those who have spent their lives working in silence, whose hands have quietly kept the world turning. To the fathers and mothers who swept hallways, scrubbed desks, carried burdens so their children might step closer to knowledge. To the souls who dared to ask why, when everyone else bowed their heads in silence. It is also a tribute to the elders of science, those who reached for the fire of the universe not to keep it for themselves, but to share its light with humanity. And finally, my deepest gratitude to the readers of an older generation, who have known loss, endured many winters, yet still sit by the hearth of a story, believing that the flame of hope has never gone out. For my father, who swept the hallways when no one noticed. For my brother, whose laughter lives in every page. For every janitor's child, every farmer's son, every orphaned dreamer told they do not belong. May you remember that even the smallest hands can carry the light of a star.